this research, this actionist intercultural research into cacao that I've been doing for 20 years now, where did this approach, where are the roots of this approach? What are the antecedents to this approach? I think this is an important question to address. And the answer to that is maize. In so many amazing ways, maize and the important symbolism of maize to Mesoamerica is the methodological antecedent to this research. In 2003, when I had finished my master's in environmental studies, that was the reason I went to Mexico the first time in 2002 to work with Gustavo Esteva. I went back to Mexico, not because I had any reason to go back, but because I knew that I had made such incredible friendships down there that I would have been a fool not to go back. And on the days that I landed in Mexico City in 2003, the launch of the Sin Maíz No Hay País campaign was happening in Mexico City, founded by and organized by, in large part, Gustavo Esteva. And what was the Sin Maíz No Hay País campaign and cultural exposition? Well, it was inspired by the great Guillermo Bonfil Batalla, who wrote the book Mexico Profundo, in which he does a quick allusion and says something to the effect that, you know, through the symbolism of maize, if one were to truly explore the depths of that symbolism and meaning to Mexico Profundo, one could understand and have a window and doorway into understanding what I am talking about when I talk about Mexico Profundo. And so Gustavo Esteva and a group of civil society and indigenous actionists and intellectuals, they took that idea of Bonfil Batalla's and they brought it to life, and they transformed it into a transformative, first of its kind food and social movement campaign called Sin Maíz No Hay País. Without maize, no Mexico. Maize, instead of just celebrating it, they not only did they celebrate it, but they tried to regenerate it. They tried to renew it. And that was the beauty of the Sin Maíz No Hay País, social movement campaign. It was as much about cultural regeneration and celebration as it was anything else. And for me, I saw in that food that was the vehicle and vessel that gave form to that campaign and that social movement. I saw how food was such a powerful vehicle for social and cultural regeneration, change, and renewal. And so, having learned all that I learned with Gustavo about maize for a decade, I really began bringing as much of that knowledge and teachings and learning that I got from working with him very closely on the Sin Maíz No Hay País campaign and in maize culture in Mexico into this research on looking at cacao and chocolate as a very important strategic and symbolic doorway and window into understanding Mexico Profundo. Because you have to think to yourself, why would a culture as deep and as beautiful as the Mesoamerican culture that, had created calendars as precise as NASA's is today, that had an understanding that, not only was the Earth rotating around the sun, but the sun was rotating around the center of the Milky Way every 52,000 years, at a time when Europeans were fighting about, whether the sun rotated around the Earth, right? Why would this exceptionally rich culture that had floating garden islands called chinampas that we still have yet to replicate the beauty and sophistication and deliciousness of this fusion of aquaponics and hydroponics with soil making and cultures in where Mexico City is right now on that shallow lake. Why would they take this bitter seed, this bitter chocolate, this chocolato, and make it their highest luxury? Well, that's a mystery that I've dedicated the last 20 years of my life to trying to reveal and rediscover. And I don't think I've fully done it yet. And even I never will, because I think it's such a deep indigenous way of knowing that you see. But what I think I have been able to celebrate and elucidate and exemplify is that, like maize, cacao is a powerful, and chocolate, they're powerful symbols to be able to start to look at and be inspired by and get practical ideas about how we can regenerate culture and ecology and food security and community in the 21st century. And so that is how I see, cacao in social movement, chocolate in social movement, as being based on the antecedent of the Sin Mais Noi Pais campaign. It's really important to see that we are part of a sacred life. And we didn't do anything to deserve this great gift of life, but our duty as good human beings is to give gratitude and service to this great gift of life. And so in this research, I really struggled to maintain that tension and balance between the economic pillars of the forest garden, the food security pillars of the forest garden, the cultural commons pillars of the forest garden, and the beauty and the mystery and the sacredness of all beings and the spirituality of the forest garden. And I love that those people who plant trees in whose shade that they will never sit and whose fruits they may never taste are truly willing to serve and demonstrate through actions what it is they're doing, and celebrate that in ritual, and celebrate that in culture, and in this case, in agriculture. And so this is an actionist research methodology that I've been engaging in for 2 decades now. And by actionist research, I mean that it's about doing the work. It's about living the work. It's not about just doing the research, using the research. It's about living the research. It's a labor of love. Actionist research, is research that must feed the people. And if it doesn't feed the people, why are you doing it? I learned that little quote from reading Nicole Bell's dissertation on an Anishinaabe curriculum. One of her elders said, if the research you're doing doesn't feed the people, why are you doing it? And so that concept and that idea really resonated with a lot of the teachings and the challenges that Gustavo gave me right from day one. He said, don't use this research, live it. And so actionist research, as evidenced by what we have striven to do in the Choco Soul Learning Community Social Enterprise, which has been part of the vehicle to be able to engage in actually regenerating the jaguar cacao, the vanilla, the red cacao, and celebrating these, indigenous and rediscovering these, indigenous cacao culture traditions and the opportunities for them, is really about embodying it. And one of the most fundamental teachings, just to look at one of the many initiatives that we're trying to work on that I think is really important, is looking at how there is no food of the gods if you don't first start with the soil of the gods. And in order to have the soil of the gods, there's divinity. Divinity has to be in the soil. If you look at the Haudenosaunee myth of Sky Woman's daughter, her body is mounded upon, and out of her body come the beans and the corn and the squash and the tobacco. But in the context of this idea here, we have to see that making soil as a byproduct of our culture is a symbol of our culture's health and well-being. It's a litmus test for how regenerative our culture is. And so I'm really interested in looking, for example, at how composting toilets designed by César Añorve can be turned into ways of making caca carbone. That is to say, using a blend of charcoal, ash, cellulose, and micro organisms that are really healthy for the soil, combining that with human excrement in order to create, instead of a poisonous, noxious black water, to create an organic carbon and nitrogen soil of the gods that can be transformed into mounds for regenerative agriculture. And my vision is not to do this in first and foremost in the jungles where the indigenous farmers and the cacao farmers need to be planting these seeds and giving the plants and trees their best starting point, but to do it here in Ontario. And I've been thinking about a way that we could turn that into kind of a cultural arts playfulness. And so I have this concept of the eco deposit, the eco deposit. And the idea is, in order to use our little composting, caca carbone generating, carbon and nitrogen soil making apparatus, you have to pay $2. But the $2 you're paying is not to use it. That $2 instead is your contribution to the transformation of that caca into caca carbone for a nitrogen and carbon rich soil and mounding that will be transformed into the planting of hopefully millions of trees. And it's something that if we really develop a powerful, clean, hygienic composting toilet for conviviality, this is an example of something that could participate in regenerating these forest gardens in such a profound way, while at the same time being a tool and a technique that is a byproduct of our culture and our daily rituals that forms a more regenerative loop, a more virtuous loop, a more cradle to cradle loop. And so we have to be imaginative and creative in imagining the hundreds, the thousands, the millions of different initiatives and ways in which we can participate in regenerating our agricultural models and our communities simultaneously, without that mental division between urban and rural, without that mental division between the way that I live and the world that I want to live in, and the world that I want my grandchildren to live in. So with those words and thinking about the 7 generations down the way, I just want to say thank you to Don McCaskill for the opportunity to share these words. Thank you to my lovely brother here who's doing the videography, and thank you to all the cacao producers that I've had the great privilege to work with. My dear Don Flor, who passed away last fall, and most importantly to Wayne Roberts and Gustavo Esteva, 2 of my mentors and elders who were deeply instrumental to this research and were on my research committee, who have both passed during this time. And I'm just really grateful for the gift of life.